this is the PRESSfeed online newsroom and digital media media relations survey. And we're talking today about the results that we got this year in our online newsroom and digital media relations survey. And we're absolutely thrilled to have Jim Brady here with us this morning to give us his viewpoint and the journalist's viewpoint on what this is all about. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning. Thanks for the invite.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. So let's get going right away. If I can just get this to move, that would be immensely useful. There we go. Okay, so you can download the entire report, and there's the link for you, press-feed.com/2012 survey if you haven't already downloaded it. And you can see the infographic on the left, and there is the link for the infographic. So if you want all the information, it's available to you. Now what we did in the survey, just to give you some background, is we looked at several studies that have been done over the past year which gave information on various things to do with what journalists and bloggers are looking for, how their jobs have changed, how reporting the news has changed, how media consumption has changed, and as a result, how is all of that affecting our job as a public relations practitioner. So this was one of the ones that we looked at. This was done by PR Newswire, and it was published about in March, I believe. And they looked at 1,000 press releases and determined that if you added visuals, photos, videos, graphics, infographics, charts, downloads, PDFs, whatever, the more that you put with your press release, the more views you're going to get on that press release. So my question to PR people was, how come we're not doing this? Jim, does this resonate for you on the other side as a journalist? If you just get a text or if you get things with visual to enhance the story, how does that influence you as to whether or not the story has more legs for you?
Well, it certainly helps. I mean, if you're, certainly if the press release is about a particular person or a particular, especially if it's about a particular person, getting some, getting a sense of how that, person, how they, kind of their communication style. Do they tell their story with passion and with energy? Do they look like someone who would be a good subject for an interview, for print, for video, for, whatever you may choose to tell that story. So I think when you can actually see a different dimension of the story outside of text, I think it helps. And I think we probably all have a little bit of an immediate instinct that when you see a press release come across and it's 20 paragraphs of text, it's kind of like, I'll take a look at that later, which usually means I'm never going to take a look at that. So
right.
when you can do something that gives it another dimension and allows somebody to look at it through the context of, is this somebody who you can build a story around or a subject that you can build a story around? I think video and photo and other assorted media can help tell that better than text.
For me, it also speaks to just the difference in the way that media is being consumed now, whereas before it was much more siloed. We had newspapers and TV stations, but online everyone has a website, and they're all using all these extra things. So I think that as the public, we've got used to seeing all this extra material, and that is why it would get more views too. So when we looked at, on both sides, some of the, like the tech group have done surveys on what journalists want in a newsroom. And 52% of the journalists said that images are very important for them, and 28% just said important. But if you add them up together, it's like 80% saying images are important. When we surveyed the PR people and asked them what they thought was important to a journalist, only 4% said they thought that images are very important to journalists, and 22% said they thought it was important, and only half of them are, in fact, adding images to releases. So to me, this just kind of says, well, we're leaving a big opportunity on the table. if they're not adding images to their press releases, Jim, how does that come across to you? Do you get that? I mean, are you getting heaps and heaps of press releases that are just text, text, text?
Yeah, the majority of them are still text, and if it's not text, I mean, adding it, I would say the 56% that say add images to releases, I mean, I would almost take out anything that's a headshot, and I imagine that's a decent percentage of that 56 is a headshot or a very simple image. I think that's why video helps, because journalists always look at this through basically one prism, which is how do I tell this story, and especially if you're dealing with an arcane topic. The way that journalists always try to get at a complicated arcane topic is to try to find a subject by which they can tell that story. And with the time constraints that have come with smaller newsrooms and increased workloads, if you can give them right off the top a visual into somebody who looks like they can help make a, can turn that into a very interesting story, I think that's a much better chance of getting picked up on that. If you take a complex issue and write a long text press release, and it's just going to be harder to get picked up because that's going to take more digging from the reporter. And at this point, like, the more you can help them by trying to answer the question they're trying to ask, you're trying to get attention to your story. They're only interested in basically saying, how can I turn this into a compelling piece of work? So the more you can help push them down that path and maybe introduce them to relevant subjects, I think the better off and more likely you're going to be to get pick up.
Absolutely. So we also did a look at the actual newsrooms and just looking at the Fortune 100 and then lower down, like the last 100 of the Fortune 500 and the first 100 of the Inc. 500. So the Fortune 100 aren't doing that badly. Over 70% of them have an image gallery. As soon as you get down further, it drops like by half, and then into the Inc. 500, only 14%. And I must say I was surprised by that, because the Inc. 500 are supposed to be the fastest, and they are the fastest growing, but to me that kind of indicated maybe they were hip and with it and really growing and innovative, and I was assuming that they would want media coverage and therefore would be a little more on the ball. But it was surprising to me that that's the case. When you go to newsrooms, what's your experience? Jim?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. But
Okay.
yeah, I was talking. So no, I mean, I think when you get into newsrooms, I think the experience is, the newsrooms are all trying to innovate and change as quickly as possible. And the good news is, you may, even if you send a press release that kind of doesn't take into account any of the new ways of communicating, you may actually have that land on the desk of a newsroom person who doesn't think that way either. But every day that goes by, there are fewer and fewer people sitting in newsrooms around the country who are sort of that sort of generation of news gathering, and they're all looking for help, and they're all looking for tips, and they're all looking for some push toward a certain way of telling that story. Just giving them the information is a good starting point, but if you can give them a lead, I mean, I think that's what they're really, what they're really looking at, what they're really looking for at this point. And you have to, be able to give them some device to tell that story with that's going to make it stand above the 10 other ones they've gotten in that hour or day.
Right. Now, I know that many of the journalists are looking at odd hours and times and when there's no one around, and they are using the corporate online newsrooms. So they're going to the press room or the media section of the website. But if that media room on their website is also still like in the last century and doesn't have all these things, I'm assuming the journalist is going to go and look elsewhere. Is that right?
Yeah, I think journalists are, again, you have to, the same way that we in newsrooms have to figure out how to put our work where people already are. That's why we're all doing stuff with Facebook and Twitter and all that. I think part of PR professionals is to try to get the releases they're doing into the streams that journalists are spending their time in. So even putting them on like the, you need to put them in the streams they already look at, which is in email and in social media and in places where they're already spending a ton of time just doing their basic job every day. And if you put it, if you're asking a journalist in a newsroom to think to go check somewhere for press releases, you could probably assume 90% of them aren't going to do it because they don't have the time. So I think that's where the strategy comes in about how do you use social media more effectively to get a story out there, and how do you, obviously email is a tried and true way of getting it in there, but again, you have to be creative within that medium as well.
And several journalists that I've spoken to have said, just send me a very short email with a link and then post the material in your press section of your website so that I can go and get it all. I don't want you to send me like attachments and a whole bunch of stuff. Just send me the pitch and then give me the links.
And I think that's a very good piece of advice. I think attachments are, there's a fair amount of studies on email, I think, that go beyond journalism that just show that an attachment is a barrier. Because an attachment means I have to go do something. I have to now download this thing, and I've got to open it. If I can open an email and what I need is in that email, and I'm not forced to download anything, that's a huge upside in terms of whether they're going to open that email first or whether they're going to open the one with an attachment first. I would say in almost all cases, it's much easier to quickly open an email, do a quick scan of it, and decide what to do. It's another to see the attachment and go, oh, I'll go back and check that later. I don't have the time or patience to read because attachment tells people it's something long and involved, even if it's not.
Right.
But it suggests to them that this is a lot of work, whereas anything in an email is not. So it's just one of those psychology things that I know journalists are pummeled with email all day. The easier you can make it, the better.
Right. Now, I posted a video interview with you that you did way back when you started talking about how video was growing, and that even when you were at the Washington Post, you were getting journalists to do video because it's becoming the de facto way. Everyone has a website, and they're all using video today. Mm-hmm. So it's not surprising to me to see that almost 90% of media websites are using video, and journalists say they want video. And it was interesting to see that there was a jump in would the media website use an externally produced video. Last year, only 10% said yes, and this year, 30% said yes. And yet, on the other side, PR people are not really that with it. Not even half of them are saying they think video is important. Could you speak to how important video is today?
Sure. I mean, it's from a journalistic standpoint, it's crucial because they're just, what we try to teach all our newsrooms is that you have to look at every story and decide which of the different storytelling methods at your disposal are best for that story, and you shouldn't necessarily assume everything has to be a written story. There are times where a video just tells the story better than text ever could, and there are times where a single photo captures a story better than video can. So you have to just be smart enough to know which stories work for which. From a PR perspective, I think the key to video is that this may not actually be true if you actually clocked it, but in the minds of most journalists, they think video is sort of a cliff notes for the text that you just sent them. They can watch this video and in a short, maybe in 30 seconds or 60 seconds, get a pretty good summary of what the text of that press release is about. And I'm not sure it would take them more than 60 seconds to read it, but I think it's one of those psychology things. It's like, I'm going to watch a quick video while I have this thing open and see if there's a story here or not. And so I think you have to view it as it's almost like an elevator pitch sort of mindset. If you're going to do a video in there, it's either got to be something that really succinctly explains what the press release is about or introduces you, as I said earlier, to a particular person who tells the story in such a compelling way that you can immediately see how there's a story there because you can build it around this person or this story. So I think that's why it's again, it's another dimension. It's not flat text on a page. It's someone moving, talking, and you can hear their voice and see how they move and really get a sense pretty quickly about whether there's more there.
That's a very interesting point. I'd never thought about that on the Cliff Notes thing. Thank you. That's terrific.
Sure.
Now, when we say newsroom study, we're, of course, not referring to media newsrooms. We're referring to the press section of a website, the corporate online newsrooms. So the Fortune 100, 64% of them have video on their site in the media section. Only 28% in the Fortune 100, and a little tiny 8% in the Inc. 500. So I don't know. I think the Inc. 500 really have to kind of get more with it here, because as you can hear, it's crucial. This is not even important. It's crucial.
If I could just jump in real quick, I think one other thing that might explain that low number is this perception that the only kind of, to do video is hard, it costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. You can overthink that. I mean, a lot of the video that does well on news websites is a simple, there was a traffic accident in the middle of town and we got the police chief to come on camera for 90 seconds and talk about it, even though the camera's a little wobbly and the reporter is not a trained video journalist, but they produced something that was of value to people, and they don't look at it and go, oh my God, the camera was wobbling a little bit. These do not have to be high-end productions that cost you tens of thousands of dollars. Just literally setting up a Steadicam and talking to somebody for 30 seconds or 60 seconds is maybe all you need to do. So I think that's why a lot of print newsrooms got late into videos. They thought they had to like produce, you know, Emmy award-winning quality stuff, and it's not.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and this is something that is a skill PR people really have to learn, that you can make and edit and put it up and have it all done in like 10 minutes. All the tools are there. It's really not hard. He's totally correct. Jim is 100% correct. You can make videos really quickly and easily. Now, this is another subject that is very interesting to me. A year ago, when media websites were asked how they would like video material delivered to them, embed codes were not even mentioned. And this year, boom, it's just gone to 76%. And because they're so easy and it's a 1-2 click, copy, paste, and the video plays on your website or your blog, it makes 100% sense to me. But I think because it's a little technical and it is a piece of code, it's something that most PR people don't know about. And if they see its code, they kind of think, oh, I don't know, I'm not going to be able to do this. Because very, very few PR people are doing it. So this, again, is something that you need to figure out. It's not hard. When you put it onto Vimeo or YouTube, they will make that code for you, and all you have to do is copy and paste it and give it to the journalist with your press release. It's really not hard. So infographics is another thing that's suddenly, and I think it's a similar thing. It's like you said, if there's a whole press release full of figures, it's going to be hard to read. But if you can put it in a visual format where I can just grasp it quickly, that's going to make a huge difference. Carry on, Jim.
Anything that, that's why the embed code was really important. And, you know, I mean, again, we're all under immense pressure in the newsrooms, much smaller newsrooms, much crazier workloads. The easier you can make it for us to get stuff that you're sending us onto our sites, the better. And embed code is the easiest way to do that. And I know it's not that hard to go figure out what an embed code is, but again, if you're dealing with a landslide of stuff, sometimes that's the kind of thing you say, well, I'll get that embed code later, and later becomes never. And so the more you can saddle anything you send up with, like the basics being ready. And I'll give you a quick real-life example of, you know, we had the Aurora shootings a couple of weeks ago, and Denver Post is one of our papers. And for years, you know, the Denver Post has shared out its content on big news days, but it's always been kind of complicated because it's not just sending links to what they're covering. It's how do you embed the video, how do you embed the photo gallery. And no one was really sending that along. They were just sending a bunch of links and letting each of the papers kind of figure out how to get the thing into their own websites. This year, this time when that story broke, we had a team located here in New York with me that basically was sending to all of the papers embed codes, and they were sending not only links to stories they were doing, but here's how you put it on your website. And the amount of people who used the Denver Post stuff was 10 times what they'd ever used any previous Denver Post stuff, because we made it easy for them. We didn't just tell them here are the stories. We told them here's how you get them on your own websites. And so that's really crucial if you can give them that extra step.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that if you have a really good piece of news for your company, you can do the same thing, and then you'll get much better distribution.
Absolutely. And if you don't have people in, I guess I would say this, if you don't have people in the newsrooms who can generate a simple embed code, then you need to go find somebody who can do that, because it's not a really high technical, it's not a huge technical level of effort, but, you know, that's sort of the price of entry. If you can't even do that, a lot of the other things we're talking about, video and all that, are going to be beyond your reach.
Okay. So the other part of it that I thought was particularly interesting was the fact that search has been so important. In the Pew State of the Media report last year, they made the statement that searching for news is the one factor that most impacted the news media in the last decade. That's quite a statement. But I can understand why they say that, because people going online and being able to find their news from wherever they want it has been an amazing game changer. But that also means that if we want our news to be found, we have to make sure that we are optimizing all our content, text, images, video, infographics, everything has to be optimized for search. And so I actually called a couple of the news wires and asked them if they had information about how many press releases were optimized for search, and none of them did. So I went and looked at 500 press releases, 100 on each of PR Newswire, Business Wire, Market Wire, and PR Web. On PR Newswire, Business Wire, and Market Wire, if you take only those 4, then the number's only 8%. If you add in PR Web, it goes up to 14%. But that is still a miserable figure. I cannot believe that that's how little we're doing search optimization of our news content. Look at the other side. 98% of journalists use search when they're looking for information about companies. And they say they use search when they start a story. Jim, I've heard many journalists say that, as you were just saying earlier, that the newsrooms are smaller, the journalists are more under pressure, they don't have the in-depth beat knowledge that used to be in the newsrooms like 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So very often you get given this, you have to go and do a search.
Yeah, well, and then the 2%, and 98% of journalists who say they use search to find out information about companies, the 2 who don't, I can't imagine who the hell they are. I mean, it's the starting point for almost everybody in journalism these days. I mean, you know, you are being asked to, even journalists who know a beat and know the people will still use Google to find out, or, you know, any of the search engines to find out more about a company. So that's the other stream that PR professionals sort of have to think about. There's the direct approach where you try to get, you know, I worked at the Washington Post for a long time, and I would get calls or emails saying, I'm trying to get the Washington Post to write about this topic. But the other half of it is there are people who are interested in that topic in newsrooms all over the country who have to be able to find what you put out when they're searching on that topic. So you may want to get a story out about, you know, a new hospital opening somewhere that has a, you know, a amazing, you know, ER ward or something, and you go to the Post and the Post isn't interested, but somewhere in the country somebody is writing a story about, you know, the changes in emergency rooms around the country, and you want them to find that press release so they come to you. So you have to think about both paths, the direct path and the indirect path of somebody who just happens to be trolling around for information that you happen to have, but they would know it if you don't search optimize those pages.
Fantastic. And it's not only, as you can see, it's not only the journalists. The public, of course, are all using search engines. And for B2B buyers, they are really using search to find new product news. And a study that was done 2 years ago now showed that for B2B buyers, online press releases is their #1 source of data prior to purchase. And trade journals are now #2. So who knew all those years ago when we were desperate for people to read our press releases that now people are actually looking for them. We just have to make sure that they find them. And then the other factor that the Pew State of the Media said, search was the one that had most impacted news consumption in the last decade, but sharing of the news is the one that's going to be the factor that will most influence in the next decade. So you have to make sure that your news can be found and can be shared. So, Jim, as you were saying earlier, you have to get it into the stream. You've got to get it into the social stream so that people can also be sharing that news.
Yeah, and I think, and also I think one of the other trends is a more targeted approach too. I think there's still, I don't know this, but I'm guessing just my own experience, or assuming from my own experience, there's still often an attempt to get the biggest possible bang, like go to the Washington Post or go to the New York Times for something, and if you're lucky and they pick it up, you reach this massive audience. I would argue that depending on what the subject of that press release is, you could go to Twitter and build a Twitter list of 50 really influential people on the topic that the release is about, and by sending it to them, you might get more of an impact with people who care about that topic and care about that issue than you'll get sending it to, having it in the New York Times where, a million people may potentially encounter it, but the number of people interested in that particular topic is tiny. Social media allows you to go in and find like really influential people who know about that specific topic and reach them directly. And and I say this because it's just the truth. I mean, there's also an argument to be made that while it's wonderful that we can have this conversation about what you guys can do to help make our jobs a little bit easier in the media world, you also don't necessarily need us at all. If you can reach the right people in social media who aren't even part of the media industry, if you find whatever they're medical professionals or whatever subject the press release is about, you can go directly to them and often get a pretty big impact out of that, just having it shared through social media. It always helps to get media coverage, but it isn't the be-all, end-all that it probably was 10, 12 years ago.
Absolutely. And are you going to get hung at 5 o'clock for treason?
Well, that's it. I'm not too worried about that. There's not much of a posse left to hang at it in this business anymore. So many people have left it in the last 10 years. No, but it is the truth. And you can sit here and say that, PR professionals need us, and I think there are times that they absolutely do, and we absolutely need PR professionals, but it's not a 100% thing anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So amazingly, even though one would think that everybody kind of knows that this is what's going on with the news, and that, as you say, you can if you just share it with the right people. And I've definitely seen that work with several different things that we've done. If you just have the right people and you get it going in Twitter, it actually from there can go into the mainstream media. And then you kind of get a happy circle going. But again, only half of even the Fortune 100s have these sharing tools in their online newsrooms. So they're not even making it easy for people to share the stuff. If you want people to share it, give them the tools. In as much as you want the journalists to use your material, help them, give them everything. Don't make them work hard. The same with the public. If they find something interesting and they'd like to tweet it, let them do it directly right there off your press release.
Yeah.
There was a study just done that came out called the Oriella Global Digital Journalism Study. Wow, that's a bit much for me this morning. But it was interesting to see that they say there's been a move back to credible spokespeople rather than crowdsourcing, and that from all their surveying of journalists around the world, that the #1 source in 2012 is credible experts and spokespeople. Does that hold true for you, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still certainly a use for crowdsourcing. It goes to what I said earlier. You have to pick the right spots for the right stories, and there are definitely stories where an expert in the field is preferred, and I think most journalists who cover a beat certainly have in the back pocket sort of a core list of people they call when they're looking for broad feedback on a certain industry, and the more you can put forward that you have people that fit that bill, the better off. Again, it all goes back to the main concept here, which is making it easy for journalists to do their jobs, and in return for that, you get a little bit more attention and more play for the work you're doing.
Right. So in our study of the corporate media sections on their website, only 59% have executive and subject experts with bios available. So there's an area where you could definitely improve your newsrooms, PR people, is make sure that you have all your subject experts and your execs have good bios, good images, maybe little videos showing what they like, as you say, so that a journalist could come there, take a look at them, see, do they look like they're passionate, do they look like they'd make a good interview, set up a whole section that would make it dead simple for these guys to use your experts. So this was our conclusion after doing all the surveying and studying of the various sides of this subject, that there's a huge gap between what the journalists and the bloggers and the media want, what they're looking for, how they could, the kind of things that would make life easier for them, and what we as PR people and corporate online press sections are actually delivering. So we need to up our game so that we can help the journalists and make it dead simple so that they will use our material. But that also opens the door, I think, to a heap of opportunity, because there's a lot of media coverage, I think, that's just being lost. Search is an opportunity. Video is an opportunity. Upgrade your online newsroom so that you have a press center that's really helpful, so that they will come there and they will find what's, what they're looking for. So, Jim, what would your conclusion be when you see all this information? Anything other than this jump out at you?
I mean, I think the basic principle is you have to align, corporate newsrooms have to be aligned to work with, if getting media attention is a goal, which I assume it is, then the more they're aligned to how media newsrooms work, the more likely that's going to be. If you're applying sort of old solutions to a new medium, you're probably going to get trouble getting pickup. If you're in social media like all reporters are now, if you're using search to research stories like all reporters do, then obviously you're going to bump into them a lot more in that process. If you're trying to, use email to send them text-heavy press releases in the midst of a wave of email, you're probably going to have a harder time getting pickup. So it's just kind of playing in the same sandbox and using the same toys that they are, that allows for better pickup. And an old approach in a new world is probably not going to net you much success.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, that's all the material that we have, and we just really want to say again that there are advantages in these gaps. And as Jim was just saying, if you can become a valued resource to digital journalists and bloggers, that's really going to help you, and it will increase your media coverage. So these are the 4 takeaways. Optimize all your news content for search, provide lots of visual material, and make that visual material really tell the story so the journalist can quickly look at it and say, oh, I get it, this is what this is about. It's not hard to make these videos. Get them out, make them that little cliff note so that it tells the story, and then learn how to do the embed codes and provide that with everything that you give. So these are all the sources for the data that where we found everything. As I said, you can download the full report, press-feed.com/2012 survey, and everything is on there. And this is what most corporate newsrooms look like today. They're just a lot of text. And we would like them, as Jim was saying, if you could mirror what the news sites are looking like, and if you have everything they want, if you have feeds and the ability to share and the image gallery and the video gallery and everything is there and available quickly and easily, that's really going to help you. So if you'd like us to give you an evaluation of your newsroom, just send me an email. And I'd like to say a really, really big thank you to Jim Brady from Digital First Media for spending 40 minutes with us today of his valuable time just to give us the viewpoint of the journalists in the digital newsroom. I really, really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate the offer. Hope it's helpful.
It was definitely helpful. Thank you very much. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. And hope that we'll see you on our next webinar. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.